The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the mahogany-paneled walls of the Riverside Country Club, where 300 of the city's most influential people had gathered to celebrate my father's retirement. Dr. William Hartwell, the city's most respected cardiologist, was finally hanging up his stethoscope after 45 years of saving lives and building an empire. I stood at the back of the room, nursing my third whiskey, watching him work the crowd like the master politician he'd always been. Handshakes, backslaps, that practiced smile that had charmed patients, colleagues, and medical boards for decades. Even at 68, he commanded every room he entered. "David!" My mother's voice cut through the ambient chatter as she approached, her silver gown shimmering under the lights. "Why are you hiding back here? This is your father's night." "Just enjoying the show, Mom," I said, raising my glass toward the stage where a podium had been set up. "Wouldn't want to miss the performance." She studied my face with the sharp eyes that had made her a formidable hospital administrator for 30 years. "You've been drinking." "It's a party, isn't it?" "David, please, not tonight. Can't you just what? Pretend to be the perfect son? Pretend I don't know what I know?" Her face went pale, but before she could respond, the microphone squealed to life. Dr. Margaret Chen, chief of cardiology, was tapping it with one manicured finger. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention," Dr. Chen's voice carried across the room. "We're here tonight to honor a man who has been not just a colleague, but a mentor, a leader, and a friend to so many of us." I watched my father straighten his tie, that familiar gesture he made before any important moment. How many times had I seen him do that before walking into my school principal's office, before family meetings, before delivering news that would change someone's life forever? "Doctor, William Hartwell has saved more lives than we could possibly count. He's trained a generation of cardiologists, pioneered new surgical techniques, and built Hartwell Medical Center into one of the finest cardiac facilities on the East Coast." The applause was thunderous. I found myself clapping mechanically, the sound hollow in my ears. But more than his professional achievements, Bill has always been a man of character, a family man, a pillar of our community. Character. The word hit me like a physical blow. I drained my whiskey glass and set it down harder than necessary on a nearby table. "Dr. Hartwell, would you like to say a few words?" My father approached the podium with the confident stride of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. The applause continued as he adjusted the microphone, waiting for the room to settle. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone that had calmed countless patients and their families. "When I started my career in 1980, I had no idea it would lead to this moment, surrounded by so many people I care about." He paused, scanning the crowd, and his eyes found mine briefly. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or concern. "Medicine has been my life's work, but it was never just about the medicine. It was about service, about putting others before yourself, about maintaining the highest standards of ethics and integrity." I felt my jaw clench. Integrity. From him. "My family has been my anchor through it all," he continued. "My wife Eleanor, who managed our home and her own career while supporting my long hours and difficult schedules." My mother beamed from her front row seat, accepting the polite applause. "My daughter Jennifer, who followed in my footsteps and is now making her own mark as a pediatrician in Boston." Jennifer, the golden child, raised her wineglass from across the room. Perfect Jennifer, who had never questioned anything, never pushed back, never disappointed. "And my son David." Here it comes, I thought. The careful navigation around the family disappointment. David has chosen a different path. Art, they call it. A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. I'll be honest, it's not the path I would have chosen for him. When you've dedicated your life to saving lives, to contributing something meaningful to society, it's difficult to understand choosing, let's call it self-expression over service. The chuckles grew louder. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. But David has always been stubborn, independent, some might say selfish. The room had gone quieter now, people sensing something shifting in the tone. I've tried to instill in both my children the values that have guided my career: excellence, dedication, putting the needs of others before your own desires. Jennifer understood. David? Well, David chose to pursue his hobbies instead of contributing to society. My hands were shaking now. This wasn't just dismissal, this was character assassination. I suppose every family has one, my father continued, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I remembered from childhood lectures. Someone who takes instead of giving, someone who disappoints instead of achieving. David, you're the biggest disgrace to this family, but I suppose we're stuck with you. He said it with a smile, as if it were a loving joke between father and son. The laughter that followed was uncomfortable, uncertain, but it was there. I stood frozen for a moment, feeling 300 pairs of eyes turning toward me, some pitying, some curious, some smugly satisfied at witnessing someone else's public humiliation. Then something snapped inside me. I began walking toward the front of the room, my steps steady despite the whiskey burning in my veins. People moved aside, creating a path, their conversations dying as I passed. David! My mother's voice was sharp with warning, but I didn't stop. My father watched me approach, his expression shifting from amusement to concern as he realized I wasn't returning to my place at the back of the room. Actually, Dad, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, since we're sharing family truths tonight, I think it's time everyone heard about your definition of integrity. David, please, he said into the microphone, his tone placating. Let's not. But I was already at the podium, and 43 years of swallowing my father's carefully constructed image had finally reached its limit. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, taking the microphone despite my father's attempts to maintain control of it. You've heard about Dr. William Hartwell, the dedicated physician, the man of character. Let me tell you about the William Hartwell I know. That's enough, my father hissed, but he was no longer holding the microphone, and his voice didn't carry. 20 years ago, when I was 23 and fresh out of college, I discovered something interesting while helping to organize Dad's files. Patient records, billing statements, insurance forms. I could see my father's face turning pale, but I pressed on. See, I've always been good with numbers, even if I chose art over medicine. And I noticed some discrepancies. Procedures billed that were never performed. Diagnostic tests charged to insurance companies that were never actually run. Medications prescribed and billed for that were never dispensed. The room was dead silent now. I could see Dr. Chen's face, shocked and confused. I could see hospital administrators beginning to understand where this was heading. At first, I thought it was just errors, clerical mistakes. So I did what any loving son would do. I brought it to my father's attention. My father lunged for the microphone, but I stepped back, keeping it out of his reach. Do you know what he told me? He said it was standard practice, that insurance companies had so much money they'd never miss it, that the extra income allowed him to provide better care for his patients, to expand the practice, to serve the community. I could hear murmurs rippling through the crowd now, voices sharp with concern and disbelief. But I kept looking because something didn't feel right, and I discovered that the extra money wasn't going to better patient care. It was going into offshore accounts, hidden trusts, real estate investments under shell company names. You're lying. My father's voice cracked like a whip, but without the microphone, only the people closest to the stage could hear him. Am I, Dad? Should we talk about the house in the Cayman Islands? The one registered under Hartwell Holdings, LLC? Or maybe the apartment in Monaco? The one you visit twice a year for your medical conferences? I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Because I've been documenting everything for 20 years. Every fraudulent billing, every hidden account, every lie you've told to cover your tracks. The crowd was buzzing now, voices rising in shock and anger. I could see my mother's face, white with horror. But whether she was horrified by the revelations or by my betrayal, I couldn't tell. For 20 years, I kept your secret because you convinced me that exposing you would hurt innocent people. The patients who depended on you, the staff who worked for you, the charities you donated to with your stolen money. I held up the envelope. But then tonight, you called me a disgrace. You said I was selfish, that I took instead of giving, that I disappointed instead of achieving. My father was trying to get to me now, his face purple with rage, but hospital security was already moving toward the stage, drawn by the commotion. So, let me tell everyone what disappointment really looks like. Dr. William Hartwell has defrauded insurance companies out of an estimated $12 million over the past 25 years. He's performed unnecessary procedures on elderly patients to inflate billing. He's prescribed medications patients didn't need because pharmaceutical companies paid him kickbacks. The room erupted. I could hear shouting, people calling for security, chairs scraping as people stood to get a better view or to leave entirely. And the most disappointing part, I said, raising my voice above the chaos. He made me complicit by making me believe that protecting him was protecting everyone else. He turned his own son into an accomplice by convincing me that my silence was noble. I set the microphone back on its stand and looked directly at my father. But I'm not silent anymore, Dad, and I'm not your disgrace. You are. I tossed the envelope onto the podium and walked off the stage. The crowd parted before me again, but this time their faces showed something different. Shock? Yes, but also a kind of respect. Or maybe that was just the whiskey talking. As I reached the exit, I could hear my father's voice behind me, no longer amplified, shouting denials and accusations. I could hear my mother crying. I could hear Dr. Chen trying to restore order. But I didn't look back. The FBI agents knocked on my door at 6:47 a.m. the next morning. Mr. Hartwell, I'm Agent Sarah Morrison. This is Agent James Park. We understand you have information regarding insurance fraud at Hartwell Medical Center. I invited them in and made coffee while they set up recording equipment on my kitchen table. By noon, I had given them everything. The financial records I'd been collecting for 2 decades, the offshore account information, the documentation of unnecessary procedures, the pharmaceutical kickback schemes. Agent Morrison looked up from the files with something like awe. Mr. Hartwell, this is extensive. Why now? Why didn't you come forward before? I thought about that question for a long time. Because I believed him when he said exposing the truth would hurt innocent people more than it would help them. Because I thought protecting the family was more important than protecting the patients he was defrauding. And what changed your mind? I poured myself another cup of coffee, thinking about the previous night, about 20 years of carrying my father's secrets like stones in my chest. He called me a disgrace in front of 300 people, said I was selfish and disappointing. And I realized that he was right. I had been selfish enough to protect him instead of his victims, disappointing enough to choose family loyalty over justice. Agent Park closed his notebook. Mr. Hartwell, you should know that coming forward now, this cooperation will be taken into account, but there may still be charges related to your knowledge of the fraud. I nodded. I understand. I've had 20 years to prepare for this conversation. The investigation moved quickly after that. Federal agents raided Hartwell Medical Center the next day, seizing records and computers. The state medical board launched their own investigation. The IRS opened a criminal tax evasion case. My father was arrested at his home 3 days later, charged with wire fraud, money laundering, and healthcare fraud. The bail was set at $2 million. My mother posted bail and then served him with divorce papers the same afternoon. The story dominated the local news for weeks. Prominent cardiologist exposed by son at retirement party. The details were devastating. $12 million in fraudulent billing, unnecessary procedures performed on vulnerable elderly patients, a network of shell companies, and offshore accounts that had been funneling money away for decades. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came during the FBI's investigation of the medical records. They discovered that at least 15 patients had died from complications related to unnecessary procedures my father had performed solely to inflate billing. 15 people, dead because of greed. I testified before a grand jury, then again at his trial 6 months later. My father's defense attorney tried to paint me as a disgruntled son seeking revenge, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, patient files, pharmaceutical company receipts, it was all there, meticulously documented over 25 years of fraud. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. My father was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. At 68 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. His medical license was permanently revoked. The medical center was sold to pay restitution to defrauded insurance companies and the families of patients who had suffered. But the phone call that surprised me most came 2 weeks after the sentencing. "David, it's Jennifer." My sister's voice was smaller than I remembered, uncertain in a way that the confident pediatrician never had been. "Hi, Jen. I wanted to apologize. I should have believed you, should have supported you." I was sitting in my studio, surrounded by canvases I'd been working on, dark, abstract, pieces that seemed to pour out of me in the months since the trial. "You didn't know." I did know something was wrong. I saw the way he treated you, the way he dismissed everything you did. I saw how he favored me because I followed his path. Her voice broke slightly. I was just too comfortable being the favorite to question why. There was a long pause. "I also wanted you to know, I've been going through some of his old patient files, the ones the FBI released. There are families who still don't know that their loved ones died because of unnecessary procedures. I'm working with victim advocacy groups to help them understand what happened, to help them seek justice." I set down my brush, looking out at the city skyline. "That's good, Jen. That's important. I know it doesn't make up for 20 years of silence, but I thought you should know what you did that night. It was brave. It was the right thing. And I'm proud to be your sister." After I hung up, I sat in my studio for a long time, thinking about courage and complicity and the different ways we inherit the sins of our parents. My phone buzzed with a text from a gallery owner in Soho who wanted to discuss my latest pieces. The paintings I'd been working on since the trial were different from anything I'd done before, raw, emotional, honest in ways that my previous work had never been. They told stories of secrets and shame, of finding the courage to speak truth even when it cost everything. Art critics were calling it my best work. Collectors were starting to take notice. For the first time in my life, my career was thriving. My father had lost everything: his freedom, his reputation, his family, his fortune. Some might say that was justice. Others might call it revenge. I called it the price of truth, finally spoken after too many years of silence. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. A journalist probably, or maybe another federal agent with follow-up questions. Hartwell Studio. Mr. Hartwell, this is Patricia Williams. My mother was one of your father's patients. She died 3 years ago from complications after a procedure she didn't need. I reached for a notepad, ready to write down her information, ready to help connect her with the victim advocacy groups Jennifer was working with. I just wanted to thank you, she continued, her voice thick with emotion, for having the courage to speak up, for putting justice ahead of family loyalty. You gave my mother's death meaning by making sure this never happens to anyone else. After I hung up, I walked to the window of my studio and looked out at the city below. Somewhere out there, my father was serving his sentence, probably still believing he was the victim of an ungrateful son's revenge. But I knew the truth. I had never been seeking revenge against my father. I had been seeking justice for his victims. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood what my father should have meant when he talked about service and putting others before yourself. He just hadn't realized he was teaching me to build something completely different from what he'd intended, something based on truth instead of reputation, on justice instead of loyalty, on courage instead of complicity. I was no longer the biggest disgrace to the Hartwell family name. I was its redemption,